to turn up the fire. You tuned in to an Indigenous Flame. Moving in with the ranks, pushing the envelope, no limit to change. We'll put these colonizers' cynics to shame. Everybody salute, get burnt by this Indigenous Flame. Moving in with the ranks, pushing the envelope, no limit to change. And put these colonizers' cynics to shame. Everybody salute, get burnt by this Indigenous Flame.
You are listening to Indigenous Flame. I'm Johnnie Jae, and welcome to 2019, and we are going to get this kicking off with a wonderful guest today. We are talking to S.A. Lawrence Welch, who is organizing the Indigenous Peoples March in Washington, D.C. And S.A., could you tell our listeners a little about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me on today. I am originally from Alberta, Canada, and I was raised throughout the prairies of Alberta and the mountains, and then I made my way down to Portland, Oregon, where I reside now. I've spent most of my career working in basically the fallout of the residential school system in Canada, and dealing with reconciliation and retribution, and advocating for those that suffer from intergenerational trauma.
I think that's so important for us to discuss, because these issues are so prevalent, like the impact of those issues from the boarding school to colonialism. We still live with that impact in our communities. It's not something that we can easily ignore. And, we're talking about the Indigenous Peoples March today. And could you tell us a little about how you've been able to bring together so many people in order to organize this event, and, how are you going to be addressing, some of the issues that we do face, like the impact of colonialism, the boarding schools, etc., through this march?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first I want to clarify that, it's not just me. We are a very, very strong coalition of activists, tribal leaders, and allies that have come together to say enough is enough. There are no borders to injustices that affect Indigenous people. We all, universally throughout the world have experienced the same issues and traumas, and that, does directly come from colonialism. But also, our land and our water rights are, being denied. Like currently in Canada, there are treaty rights and being broken as we speak regarding pipelines, and it's time that we bridge the gap and unify and work together to help create a balance for our Indigenous liberation. There hasn't been a movement like this since the 70s, and it's about time we pick up where our relatives left off.
Absolutely, especially because, I'm glad you mentioned globally, because, when people hear Indigenous or Native, they tend to think just, here in America and Canada. But, even right now down in South America, the Indigenous people there are starting to face the same violence that our ancestors faced, with being violently removed from the land, being murdered, and, just that outright violence that, a lot of people tend to think like, no, that was hundreds and hundreds of years ago. We're starting to see that now in our Indigenous communities worldwide, whether it's in South America or you move across the ocean to Australia or to these Indigenous communities that a lot of people don't even realize that, they're Indigenous people.
Absolutely. And that is a huge aspect of it. We are very fortunate to live in the age of technology that we do, where information is accessible, but there are still people that are Indigenous people to, continents and countries that just don't have that access and those resources to see that they're not alone in their fights, and they are dealing with the same things. And that's what, that colonialism mentality kind of does. It separates us. It's been meant to segregate us, and the system set up to oppress us has been historically working. And it's time that those of us with those privileges of technology and advancement use them to our abilities to help liberate.
Absolutely. And that's so important for us to do. You mentioned unifying, and that's honestly, that's what we need to do, because right now, everybody talks about our communities being so divided, and not just, Native communities, but the nation at large. And, what I'm seeing is the total opposite, because I'm starting to see people come together in order to kind of combat some of these issues, especially now with the migrant caravan down at the southern border, and, Trump calling an humanitarian security crisis at the border. And a lot of people are so removed and so ingrained with this idea that, that these are villainous brown people coming to invade the U.S. And, I had a conversation not too long ago with a relative of mine who just kind of we were talking about these injustices, and just kind of like a reflex. It was like, oh, that's why we need to quit letting people in this country. They're coming to ruin, take our jobs and stuff. And I'm like, wait a second. I said, you realize that those people at the border, a majority of those people are indigenous people. Like, they don't speak Spanish or Portuguese or any of these languages. They actually speak indigenous languages from, the lands that they're coming from. And that's why it's so hard for them to get representation, because no one speaks their language. And when I said that, it kind of took him aback, because, we're a Native family. And I don't think that ever crossed their mind that, oh, wait, they are Native people. Like, there's other Native people outside of, how we view our Native communities. And, it kind of just catches me off guard, because even now, when you still meet people who, when you let them know, like, oh, I'm Choctaw, or I'm Oto, or I'm Navajo, they're still like, Native still exist?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's it's a really good point, and I want to stress that we have these ideas so deeply ingrained that, there is this border set up that separates people, and, they were set up to secure the powerful that, wanted this, rather than, the needs of the indigenous, population. And that's such a crucial talking point that, we don't recognize, and we're so far removed from it, because a lot of people don't understand if it hasn't directly happened to them, and it's easy to turn off the television program, and it's easy to turn off the news, or, say, I can't focus on this right now, it's really detrimental to me, or, it makes me really sad. But we have to recognize it and acknowledge, these injustices that are happening, to actually persevere forward.
Absolutely, especially because, it's so easy to do that, because for a lot of people, they don't have to live with the impact of it. And so it's so much easier for them to turn that blind eye, and not realizing that, in doing that, not only do they become complicit in it, but they're starting to encourage it, like that lack of empathy for other human beings. And just kind of like more of that me kind of mentality, where if it doesn't affect me, then it's not a problem. And that's why so many of our issues as Native people still exist, because, for me, I always, when you're talking about, like, whether it's Native mascots, or whether you're talking about like the murdered and missing Indigenous women, people are always thinking, well, it doesn't affect me, so how can it really be a big problem? And, it's like, it doesn't matter if it affects you or not, because the attitude behind it, the motive behind these issues still affects you, whether that power comes from like sexism or, racism, it has an impact on every single one of us.
Yeah. Indigenous issues affect everyone. It starts at us as a base, but it does spread, and it is a real thing. It's such a pity and a shame that we, are so concerned about elevating ourselves on a much more personal and intimate level than we are, of thinking about our neighbor. We're all fighting for the same thing, but we covet the piece that we seem to break off for ourselves, without recognizing that if we work together, the piece that we break off will be much larger,
Yeah, and it's kind of finding ways to relate that to other communities too, because so much of our issues are, all intersected, and they all stem from the same branches of white supremacy and colonialism. And I think it's really hard for people to wrap their heads around this because, while these are, that's the foundation of these issues, people aren't really, I guess you would say, more conscious of, how these issues, they impact all of our communities. But depending on how our communities, whether, we're more like our tribal communities or, maybe you're an urban community, they have a different impact. Like the issues stem from the same branches, same causes, but the impact looks very differently from community to community. And, even how we heal those issues within our community, like what works for Native communities isn't going to work for the Black community, or it's not going to work for, maybe the Asian community. And so, I think that's what makes it so hard for people to kind of realize that we need to work together, because they're thinking, but that's not going to work for us. But if we still come together and we still discuss these issues as a collective, then we're more able to me, I think, just more able to kind of look at these issues and be like, oh, well, this may not work for you, but this could work for us, or we could take bits and pieces of what this community is doing and, kind of go from there and make it work for our community, or use it as a starting point, even just to start the discussion even. And I think that's what makes it just so hard for us to really come together. And I think that's why every time we do start to talk about solidarity or unifying or being able to work with other communities, it always comes back to this almost like oppression Olympics, like, oh no, well, it affects us worse, or, you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's funny, when we focus more on our differences or the negative connotations that could come from, unification and, solidarity with each other. It's so detrimental, because we could be focusing on our common grounds. There's so much more in common than we have separating us. But the thing separating us seems so large and so significant that, we don't lose who we are when we help, our relatives and our kin. We actually liberate ourselves by doing it. That's the greatest form of liberation, is, understanding that our existence is meant to elevate others, right?
Exactly. Because, when you really think about it, that's how Native communities still exist today, because we are very communal people. And, it's not that we were just helping, each other as natives, like our own individual nations, but, also reaching out to other nations and helping them as well. That's why, we've managed to survive colonialism, while we've managed to attempt, some of the, most egregious forms of genocide that you could possibly think of. We're still here despite all that. And so much of that is because of the love that we just have for our communities and for each other, like being able to, pull each other up, or to give what you have, even when you don't have.
Right. There has been a lot of self-preservation in our communities that is, it can be very disheartening to see it, when, again, going back to the point of, fighting for what you've worked for. But, the reality behind that, too, is we don't necessarily realize that, sorry, this is going to be a whole train of thought here, so bear with me. It's funny, because when we work on self-preservation and, have become, quote unquote, colonialized, and we lose our cultural significance along the way, and be it like, our fundamental, belief systems, while we are preserving ourselves, getting back to that is a process that isn't going to happen overnight. There's a lot of people that are still learning their languages or, still trying to find their families after being separated due to survival mechanisms. And there's a lot of that going on within our communities where, we need to give people patience and time to understand, you can't be upset at somebody for, being standoffish or being unreceptive, but you can offer them patience and kindness to, open that door back up to a greater understanding. This is only a step, towards the future. And, we're really hopeful with this march and with the movement that we're going to be able to start bridging gaps for, the next generation and, attain the things that we once had.
And I think that's what's important too. Patience, because, we are still having to do the work to reclaim so much that has been lost or just straight out taken from us. And, families coming together, trying to find their roots, trying to come back into our Native communities. It's always a hard conversation to have because on one hand, you understand where that standoffish comes from, that distrust of, people saying, oh, I'm Native, and wanting to just claim that space within our communities or, use it as a talking point or to be trendy or to silence Natives. And, that's where that comes from. But at the same time, there are Natives who have been separated through no fault of their own, through, being adopted out like the 60 Scoop or, being separated during their boarding schools from their families and having to reconnect and wanting to come back in and, kind of meeting just having all these walls put up in their way. Oh, no, you can't be here. Oh, you haven't been here, so you're not this. And, it's such a hard, conversation and such a hard gap to kind of breach because, we don't have the patience with each other anymore. Especially now with call out culture and social media, it makes it just so much easier to just want to, have some instant gratification of blocking a person out or, automatically shutting them down rather than bringing them in and trying to educate and being okay, well, you want to reconnect. Well, this is the way that it needs to go. And, it's kind of oh, I don't even know how to say it.
It's easier to simplify things. So, with the call out culture comment, it's easier to simplify things by saying, this is the way it is, and this is the way I'm going to believe it. And then that perpetuates the cycle. Yes. I often have this in a lot of the conversations and work that I've done is, what makes a person Indigenous? I definitely have received some slack for my comments regarding, whether you are of Native ancestry, but you've never been Indigenous a day in your life. There are people who, have suffered from these systems set in place to be oppressive and to, assimilate our communities and our peoples to, fit this mold of what, is societally acceptable. Yet, they are a prime example of being Indigenous because they have literally suffered the system of being Indigenous. Differently from our relatives that have grown up on reservations or in, the urban communities, but are still attached to their, cultural sources. It doesn't make the person who grew up any less significant, but, it definitely is a point that needs to be breached because we need to heal these people. We need to heal our people. We need to heal the people, and we need to work together to make that come to fruition.
Yes, and it's so hard because, when it comes to Native identity, people just want this easy, simplified version of what it means to be Indigenous, but yet it's so complex and so layered, and depending on what Native community you're from, it's very different. Right. And I know a lot of people tend to think of Native identity just in terms of, blood quantum, of citizenship. But it goes so much more deeper than that, because, I've been making this point quite a bit when talking about Elizabeth Warren, is that she's been very careful in making that distinction between tribal citizenship and ancestry, but yet not all natives are citizens of their tribes. And, and
not all are federally recognized.
Exactly. And that ancestry, despite citizenship, they still have that ancestry. And that ancestry is a part of their identity. It's not just a talking point, or it's not just a DNA test that says, oh, look what I have in my blood. That ancestry that they have makes them a part of their community. Whether it's through blood, whether it's through kinship, or, the relationships that they have within their tribe, or participation, or, just that reciprocity, okay, I'm not even going to try with that word today, but, yes, there you go. But, it's like we always say, it's not just who you claim to be, but who claims you back. And a lot of people tend to think, they don't claim this person, or they don't claim that person because they're not a citizenship, or because of blood quantum. But yet, when you look at our Native communities, we know who our people are. And we know who they are, we know their families, we know what they do in our communities, and they are a part of us, whether or not they have that citizenship or not. Right. So, even in making that distinction between citizenship and ancestry, you still have to take into account that, but, not all of our communities,
we're given choices.
Exactly. There you go.
Yeah.
That's
literally what it comes down to. And, we inherently, as very different nations, but people see that inherent sadness in, our community members that have been taken away from us. And it's time that we, do open up and, give people the opportunity to regain what was taken from them. But also, I am cautious as well, because there are a lot of cases where, being of Cherokee descent, it, doesn't speak volumes when, you are
so removed from that
siding
identity.
with. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and like the values that we have, and that's why, it's so hard for people to understand this, because, for me, being Indigenous, it's more than that blood, because I even, for me, the way that I see it is, I'm born, I'm Oto, I'm Choctaw, I know who my family is, but even in spite of that, I don't feel that I am entitled to be a part of my community. To me, it's something that we almost have to earn. And I don't want to say
put in the work.
Yeah, you put in the work, you take the time to, make those connections within your tribe, to maintain them, to learn your languages, your tradition, to carry on what it is to be Indigenous. And because it's not just in our blood, we know natives who grew up in Native communities, yet they shun everything Native because of the shame that has been inflicted. Just the same that you have natives who, were taken from their families and, don't know about the values that natives have, and, kind of cling to the whiteness that they've been brought up in, not realizing that that is so detrimental, not just to them, but to their own people. And there's so many different nuances that we have to take into account and discuss if we are really talking about decolonizing and healing our people. And it's not just this, we're going to shut you out and that solves the problem. No, we have to bring people back in. We have to give them that connection to, the inherent identities and values that, are missing, that were taken, that, the rest of us who grew up in our Native communities have been, a little more privileged in being able to grow up with that, or to have some knowledge of it, whether or not we accept it or reject it.
Right. Absolutely. And that's the thing. It's, it is, and I say this very, very, wholeheartedly, it is a privilege to be able to grow up with your culture and with your people, surrounded by your family. And those who haven't had that privilege, did lose out, and accepting them and bringing them in and teaching them and cultivating them, and, understanding that they are like baby deer, they're just going to get their feet. Yeah.
And it takes time. Like, even now, we're not all on the same level of healing or understanding. Like, some of us are just now starting, or some of us maybe started when we have been privileged, like you had somebody in your family who was super, able to kind of like step above their circumstances and heal earlier than others. And so you got the benefit of their healing, whereas some of us are the first in our families to, start that cycle of healing. And we're all at these different levels, and we're still learning. Like, we can't, there's not one of us that can say we're totally decolonized, because it's a whole process.
Because we're not.
Yeah, like, it's a process we're going to spend the rest of our lives undergoing. And even, with the activism and the work that we do in our communities, most of us will never see the fruit of that labor in our lifetimes, but we still do it.
But that's not the point.
Yeah, for the future generations.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
I mean,
and that's why, putting something like this on during the Indigenous Peoples March is so important, because it is setting the foundation, it's setting the groundwork for the next generations to have that fruit. And it may not happen in their lifetime, and it may not happen in the next, but, it has to start somewhere. And we are responsible for our children, and we are responsible for our earth, and we are responsible for our people, and it's time.
It really is. I think that's what I like about being alive just now in this time. There's a lot of horrible things that are going on, but if you really look beyond that, you see so much love, so much passion, and so many people like coming together to work on these issues, and not through hate or not through revenge, but because they truly believe that you lay that groundwork now, and we start to make things better later. Like, if we're doing it now, it's going to happen. Like, it starts. And, we've seen it throughout history. There's things going on now that are terrible. There's things that have always been terrible. But, when you look at what our ancestors went through, with every generation, it gets a little better. It gets a little better. It gets a little better. Not much, but, it does show that work, that it does start to have a cause. And we get to reap the benefits of that cause, and
absolutely,
it's like, I'm so excited for the march, because, I love when Native people come together. And I mean, to me, it's always amazing when you have so many Native people who come together for a singular cause, who are willing to stand up for their people. And to me, it just like shows courage. Like, not just for us to be able to stand up and speak, but it shows our future generations that they don't have to be afraid, and that no matter how alone they may feel, that they have these entire nations behind them, entire communities, and people who are always going to be there to, back them up, support them, and, they're not going to be alone. Like, we're there along with the spirits of our ancestors every step of the way. We are totally supported by, just so much love from our communities, and just so much love for, our people, our traditions, and just for, creation in general.
Yeah, absolutely. It's, again, like, going back to a little point you said there, it's happening, like, with the march, it's happening on such a large scale. But, I want to reassure people that are out there that there's so much that you can do within your own communities. Being from Canada, and I said, like, growing up between the mountains and the prairies, I got to see a very dispersed demographic of, our First Peoples there, the First Peoples there. And you can step out onto a street and you can offer assistance to somebody who is in need or in crisis. There's so many ways of being able to access your community and help. It doesn't have to be on a grander scale. Those small steps, those small offerings are such a big part of the healing process. There's so many ways to be involved. And I encourage people to do that. Absolutely.
Yeah. And because, I think that's the other thing, is that a lot of people tend to think that to make change, it has to be big. But, for me, it always goes back to, making a choice.
Mm-hmm.
And it starts with those little steps. It starts with who you want to be, what do you want to see in your community, and to just do it. If you see a need, like, don't wait for somebody or think that somebody else is going to take care of it. You know, take the initiative to just do it. And, you know, because I guess when I grew up, I didn't have a lot of like Native role models, you know, like on TV or, you know, in roles that I wanted to be in. I didn't see that. And so like, I kind of like, I had this whole essay I wrote in college, and it was like what it means to be Indigenous in the 21st century. And I found a copy of this and I was reading it thinking like, whoa, like I was so disenfranchised with being Native. Like I was so thirsty for some kind of leadership that I wasn't seeing. Like the whole point of this essay was like, how can we exist if we don't have leaders teaching us how to be? Like, you know, if we're identifying with, you know, Budweiser, or if we're identifying with this, but not our culture, then how are we going to be Indigenous? And I was just so disenfranchised because, and I didn't realize it then, but now I do because of the work that I've done with Native Max Magazine and even with the Tribe Called Geek, being able to meet people from different communities and see the work that they're doing within their communities that don't always, you know, get that grand scale recognition. And it opened my eyes to so much, and even to the realization that, you know, throughout my life, that I did have Native role models, that there were people in my community that were stepping up to make things better, that were wanting to do better for the future. And even for me, that were there advocating for me and trying to make sure that, you know, I was going to have the, you know, best opportunities that I could have. And I never realized that until, you know, I started doing work in the media and started seeing the work within the community. And I was just like, whoa, you know, like, so it doesn't have to, you know, be something grand. It's something that is simple as being, as, you know, deciding I'm going to be a good mother. I'm going to be a good daughter or brother or sister or uncle, or I'm going to pick up this piece of trash, or I'm going to volunteer. I'm going to do this. So, you know, you made a really good point there that, you know, it starts in our communities, and it starts with us just making a choice to want to do better.
Right. And that's the entire purpose behind this. You know, we want, like I could say, we're tired of, you know, living in the shadows of another person's plans. And, you know, let's step forward into this light. You know, it's our time. But there's so many people that don't have that ability. So, you know, working within their communities is the most important thing. And I love that comment about, you know, being a good wife, being a good mother, being a good sister. You know, that is such a strong point for, you know, our people as a whole. You know, like, be the best version of yourself possible. And also, you know, understand when people falter, and especially people within our community. You know, when we lash out or we have our anger or sadness, it comes from a place of, you know, how do I word this? We have to understand the root of where that anger and sadness is coming from, because it's based on our circumstances, you know, and not that we can't be held accountable for those things, but to be understood is all that it really comes down to.
And patience. You know, because so much of that, like the behavior too, like, you know, when you see Natives who are involved in addiction, or, you know, who are struggling, you know, there's a reason for that. There's a cause that we don't always understand. You know, it could be domestic abuse, it could be sexual abuse, it could be, but it stems from abuse. You know, it stems from the violence and colonialism, that historical trauma that just gets passed down, because it has really damaged the way that we relate to each other as human beings, and the way that we even view our emotions. You know, we hold so much of it inside and think that, oh, you know, you kind of have to be that stereotypical stoic Indian. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or that warrior, that we never realize that, you know, it's okay to be weak and to ask for help. And, you know, it's just kind of like learning to even be patient with ourselves, because, you know, we all struggle with, you know, battles that whether, no matter where it stems from, we all have our own struggles. We all have our own battles that we're dealing with, but that doesn't mean that we're not able to heal, or that we're not able to help others, or even be patient with others.
Well, the first step to healing is not feeling alone. And, if we are capable of, reaching out to, our brothers and sisters and, asking them, are you okay? Or, starting a dialogue, and again, the comment of the Oppression Olympics, like kind of, it's funny because it's one of those things where, we've had it terrible, but at the same time, we also can be in control of our own reactions to it, and that's something that we have to learn. Again, patience comes in with that as well, but we have to unlearn is to a process itself, and to unlearn behaviors. And it's the same thing with addiction. You can definitely be addicted to the sadness and that inherent trauma that goes along with just being Indigenous, but you can also push through it and push forward. And we need more resources to be able to set up our communities for success in that.
Yeah. And, honestly, I think that's where we're at now. Because, as Natives, we've had to exist within survival mode for so long that it's like reflex. We do it as naturally as we breathe. And, we're in this point in time where we don't just have to survive. Like, now's the time when we're able to thrive. Like, we're able to be, where we're able to be a lawyer or a doctor. I mean, we've had Natives who have, I'm going to give a shout out to him because right now I'm just still in awe of this, but we have Aaron Yazzie who has designed hardware on the Mars rover that is now on Mars. So we literally have, Native knowledge and science on Mars right now. And so, like, we're in this time when we can thrive, like where we can reach bigger than what we've ever thought possible and it be a reality for us. And I think what is holding us back from that is just the fact that we cannot seem to get out of survival mode to step into that thrival mode, because, the tools that serve us while we're surviving, they no longer serve us when we're trying to thrive. They inhibit us. And, that's something I struggle with, because I find myself, like, I need to be in thrival mode. Like, I know this on a conscious level, but I am so used to living within that survival mode, in just, having to deal with lupus, depression, and, being a suicide survivor, that, I do know that being in that, I hold myself back a lot. And it's really hard to kind of step outside of it, you know what I mean? When it's just,
well, it's an absolute
so
privilege to be able to step outside of it, and that's the thing.
Is.
It's like, there's a lot of things that are still inaccessible to our communities, like positive mental health services. It's such it's one of those things that there's still very much a black spot on it, if you will, when it comes to getting help. And it's, if I can share a personal anecdote to that, I lost my father long before he died due to his time spent in a residential school because he never sought mental health help. And, in turn of that, it was due to an accumulation of circumstances that put him into a state where he ended up dying alone because of his mental health issues, and there was such a stigma around it to receive help that, a lot of our, and especially, men in our community never receive that, that care or that compassion, and it's very unfortunate.
It really is, because, it is a privilege to be in that thrival mode, because I think of like, I even look at my family now and, I grew up poor. And, I look at, where my family is financially right now, and they're still struggling. And, we all help each other. And I laugh because it's the same that within my circles in general, is that we kind of tend to just pass resources to each other, in order to help pull each other up when we need it. It's like, we go back and forth like, oh, you need this. Okay, well, let me help you. And so we're passing around resources, and we do this with my family. And I always crack up because it's like, oh, let me borrow $20. And then you have another, like your dad or somebody, it's like, do you have $20? And so you're just passing, that money to each other to help you get through. And I see so much of that in our Native communities. And, it's such a privilege to be in that position to where you can access a different resource. You know what I mean?
Right.
I don't know if I'm saying that right, but you know what? It's because like even with my mental
I'm picking
health
up what you're putting down.
yeah. But like even with my mental health care, I was able to get help. And the first time that I got help that I guess you would say that actually helped was because I had a therapist who didn't understand me at all. And I was actually so frustrated that I quit going to sessions. And I knew I needed them, but I quit going because I couldn't relate to her. I couldn't communicate, what I was feeling or anything to her. And what made a difference was the fact that she started coming to me. Like she started searching me out. Like if I missed a session, she would go look for me. And, she started to find out, places where I hung out and places that I'd be, and she would just show up. And so she reached out to me and she made an effort, and she had to unlearn too. Like I had to learn how to communicate to her, but she also had to learn how to communicate to me and to kind of let go of the misconceptions that she had about Native people. Because the biggest point of miscommunication was that for her, Natives were alcoholics or drug addicts, and that was the stem of the problem. And, we couldn't communicate past that. So she had to unlearn a lot of what she was taught about Native people and a lot of the stereotypes that she had. And I had to learn to, communicate with her and also stop looking at her as an enemy. And, it took us probably about 1.5 years. But she really helped me, and she literally, saved my life and helped me save myself. Like she wasn't trying to be a savior. She was trying to give me what I needed to take care of myself. And she did. And, our Native communities lack that because our mental health care providers, our healthcare providers never want to step beyond, never want to go the extra mile to understand that we're in a very unique situation as Native people because of that historical trauma, but also because of the contemporary trauma that we face through colonialism. And so, it is a privilege that, for me to have gotten that help, and I see that, and it's always a reminder, this is what we're working for. Like we're trying to gain more access for our people to get the help that they need to be able to live. Not just, try and just make it day to day, but to actually live in every...
Not just to survive, but to actually live. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Which is why I'm glad, that we're having this march because, as I said, I love when Native people come together because there's so much healing in that because you get to see Native people who are living and who are not just living, but who are fighting and doing so much more for... just for the future and putting, so much work and love into that. So I'm always glad, I'm excited for the march, which talking of which, could you give us some more detail on, what is going to happen through the march and when?
Yeah, the specifics. Yeah, absolutely. So kind of for the day, we're really excited. We have a pretty action-packed weekend, actually. So on that Friday, we are doing I should say, give dates exactly here. So on Friday, the 18th of January, we are doing a 8 a.m. gathering at the Building of Interior Affairs in Washington, D.C. The address there is 1849 C Street Northwest. And at 9 a.m., once we've all congregated, we are going to be offering prayer. And I'm really excited about this because we have so many wonderful languages and people coming from all over the world to offer their voices in prayer to give us our peace before we step off on the ground. From there on, we will do our march to the JFK hockey field at the National Mall. As well, we will be doing a rally from 11 a.m. until 5 p.m. with some amazing speakers. The rally location is 1964 Independence Ave Southwest in Washington. Our speakers, you are speaking, which is really exciting for us to have you come and share your voice as well. And then the rest of the weekend we have, actually the following day after the march is the Women's March. And then on the 20th in DC, we are having a leadership meeting, and it will be the first of its kind for our organization, where we're going to be discussing with water protectors, tribal leaders, different Indigenous leaders from around the world are all going to come together and try and come up with viable solutions to the issues that are affecting and directly affecting the Indigenous people and our sacred earth. And then from there on, we're just going to keep on trucking along with our events. Actually, I forgot to mention too, this is so silly of me. I feel daft for not mentioning it. We actually, the night after the march, so on the evening of the 18th, we are having a benefit concert, which is really exciting. It'll be at Songbird Music House. And we've got a whole plethora of Indigenous artists that are going to be there. Some of them, we've got Reeve Kalel, Doc and Spencer, Baptiste, Alex Brittany, Defy, and Natani Means, and then our headliner is Superman. So it's going to be pretty awesome. You can get all the details for the events, any info on the march that you need on our website at indigenouspeoplesmovement.com.
And who would people contact in case they wanted to sponsor or send a letter of support?
So really great. On our website, everything is all there. So we do have a full contact form. You just need to put what it's pertaining to in the subject matter, whether it be sponsorship, whether it be, providing any type of assistance. We have a volunteer form as well up on the website that you can fill out if you'd like to, lend a hand, which we definitely will need. We are expecting quite the turnout, which is really great. And what was the other one that you said for offering a letter of support? Yes. Sorry. That is on the website too. If you want to be really specific, it's indigenouspeoplesmovement.com /IPMC. And that's where you can find all of the people who are supporting us thus far, as well as the support letter template.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm so excited for this march, and I'm excited to speak. I was just thinking this the other day that I used to get really nervous before I spoke. And I don't know, over the last couple of years, now I just get fired up because it's almost like you don't have to worry about being censored anymore. Or,
right.
like holding back and like trying to coddle people. Like, there's such a tenacity that I see in Native people now that, it's like, say it like it is. Don't hold back.
Well,
because,
it's not the worry about offending anymore.
Yeah.
It's just speaking a truth. And that's, kind of comes with that era, it's, we aren't looking to offend people. We're looking to tell them our truths. And this is the best way to do it is, by uniting and coming together and having so many voices come forward and speak the truth. And that's, what the world needs to hear.
It really is. And, I'm so excited for this march. And again, I'd really like to thank you for speaking with me today. And, I can't wait to meet you in DC because I know that's going to be some fun.
Yeah.
It's going to be some nerding out.
I'm winking to the phone right now. Oh, my goodness.
Again, I would like to thank you for taking the time to talk with me today. And to all our listeners out there, please do support the Indigenous Peoples Movement and the March in DC. I'm Johnnie Jae, and you're listening to Indigenous Flame. Until next time, remember to start each day with, "Not today, colonizer."